The doctors said she would never walk. What the maid tried instead wasn't approved or safe. The Winlock house was built to prevent accidents. Every hallway was wide, every corner padded, every movement measured, documented, approved. Blythe Winlock had not walked since she was a toddler. Not because she didn't try, but because every attempt ended the same way. Fear, stiffness, collapse. Calder Winlock trusted the system that surrounded his daughter. Doctors, therapists, schedules, boundaries. What he trusted less was instinct. Rosalind Carter James had learned not to argue with people who signed checks. She learned to listen instead. She noticed how Blythe's legs tightened only when someone was watching, how her feet pressed flat against the floor when she felt safe, then curled back when fear returned. No chart recorded that. The playground was supposed to be harmless, a controlled environment, a place to observe, not to try. But when Blythe reached for the rail that morning, something changed. Rosalind hesitated, because once she helped her stand, there would be no way to pretend nothing had happened. And when Calder stepped into view, frozen where he stood, Rosalind realized this moment would never be forgiven, only judged. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The Winlock estate didn't hum with life, it ticked. Every hour had a purpose, every room had a function, and every person inside it had learned to move carefully. Blythe's day began at 7. Stretches with the physical therapist, breakfast on the terrace, lessons with the tutor, lunch in the sunroom, more stretches, rest, dinner, sleep. The schedule never changed. Calder believed in structure the way other men believed in prayer. Mobility aids lined the hallways like silent sentries. A wheelchair by the stairs, a walker near the library. Railings installed along every wall. The house had been remodeled around limitation, and everyone inside it had accepted that this was permanence. Blythe had not walked since she was 4 years old. The doctors called it psychosomatic. The specialists called it complex. Calder called it tragic, and threw money at every expert who promised hope. But hope, Rosalind noticed, was always scheduled for next quarter. She watched the parade of professionals come and go. They measured, they documented, they spoke in clinical tones about muscle atrophy and developmental windows and the importance of managed expectations. Calder trusted them absolutely. Progress, he said, had to be controlled. But Rosalind didn't see progress. She saw performance. Blythe moved differently depending on who was watching. With the therapists, she was compliant but stiff. With Calder, she was fragile, apologetic. With the tutors, she was distracted, pulling her legs close like she was protecting something. But when Rosalind entered the room, something shifted. Blythe's shoulders dropped. Her breathing slowed. She stopped, flinching at sudden movements. And more than once, Rosalind caught her pressing her feet flat against the floor just for a moment before quickly pulling them back up. It wasn't pain that stopped her. It was fear. Rosalind began testing the theory quietly. She'd hum while folding laundry nearby. She'd sit on the floor instead of hovering. She'd talk about small things, birds outside the window, the smell of rain, the way light moved across the walls. And every time, Blythe's body relaxed just a little more. One afternoon, while Calder was locked in a conference call and the house felt emptier than usual, Rosalind sat on the rug near Blythe's reading corner. She wasn't assigned to be there. She just was. Blythe had her legs stretched out in front of her, a book open on her lap. She wasn't reading. She was staring at her own feet. Then slowly, so slowly Rosalind almost missed it, Blythe pressed both feet flat against the floor. Her knees straightened. Her weight shifted forward. She was bearing weight. Not much, not long, but enough. Rosalind realized Blythe could bear weight, but only when she felt unseen. Blythe's eyes flicked up, catching Rosalind watching. The moment shattered. She pulled her legs back in, folding herself small again, her face flushing with something that looked like shame. Rosalind didn't react. She just smiled softly and went back to folding the blanket in her hands. But her mind was racing. Some people leave when progress looks slow. Others stay long enough to notice what's being avoided. She thought of something her grandmother used to say back home. Sometimes what doesn't move is what's been taught to stay still. That night, as Rosalind prepared Blythe's room for bed, Calder asked her how the day went. Quiet, Rosalind said. She's doing well. She didn't mention what she'd seen. Not yet, because if Blythe could move but chose not to, then someone had taught her that staying still was safer, and Rosalind needed to know why. The therapy sessions changed. Where they'd once been gentle, stretches, encouragement, small movements, they now felt clinical, cold. The new physical therapist didn't speak to Blythe like a child. She spoke to her like a problem that needed solving. Straighten here. Hold there. Don't compensate. Focus. Blythe's face grew blank during those sessions, her eyes distant. She followed instructions perfectly, but something inside her had gone quiet. Calder approved of the new approach. He called it evidence-based. He said Blythe needed discipline, not coddling. He added another session each week, extended the morning routine, reduced free time. Structure, he told Rosalind one evening, is the only thing that keeps hope alive. But Rosalind didn't see hope. She saw a child learning to disappear. She started asking questions. Carefully. To the housekeeper, to the evening nurse, to the driver who'd worked for the family for 8 years. That's when she learned the truth no one had mentioned. Blythe had stood once. Years ago. Briefly. She'd been 6. It happened during a holiday when most of the staff had time off. Just Blythe, Calder, and a nanny who no longer worked there. No therapists, no doctors, no cameras documenting progress. She'd stood by the piano, held the edge, taken 2 small steps. Then, a week later, she stopped trying entirely. The regression was swift, complete. The doctors were called back in. Tests were run. New diagnoses were suggested. But no clear explanation was ever recorded. The incident was mentioned once in a medical file, then never discussed again. What Rosalind was noticing had been noticed before and quietly buried. Blythe began seeking Rosalind out between scheduled activities. She'd ask small questions at first. What was it like where Rosalind grew up? Did she have sisters? Did she ever feel afraid of things that didn't make sense? Rosalind answered honestly. She didn't perform comfort. She didn't simplify. And Blythe seemed to relax into that. One afternoon, while Rosalind was changing the linens, Blythe spoke without looking up from her sketch pad. Do you think some things are just not supposed to happen? Rosalind paused. Like what? Like me? Walking. The words hung in the air. Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed. Why would you think that? Blythe's pencil hovered over the page. Because every time I try, something bad happens. What kind of bad? Blythe didn't answer. She just kept drawing tight, nervous circles that overlapped until the paper tore. That night, Rosalind was turning down the bedroom lights when Blythe's voice came soft from the dark. It's easier when nobody's watching. Rosalind stopped. What is everything? The girl's breathing was steady, but her words carried weight that didn't match her age. Rosalind wanted to ask more, but she knew better than to push. She'd left the door cracked, just enough for the hallway light to spill in. As she walked downstairs, her hands were shaking. The problem no longer felt medical, it felt environmental. Whatever was stopping Blythe wasn't in her legs. It was in this house, in the schedules, in the eyes that tracked her every movement, in the voices that measured her worth by her ability to meet expectations she'd never been allowed to set. And Rosalind understood something that made her stomach turn. Helping Blythe might mean going against everyone who claimed to be helping her. It might mean disobeying the doctors, defying Calder, breaking the routines that held this house together. Not everyone who sees the truth is prepared to carry it. Some people walk away before the cost becomes clear. Rosalind realized helping Blythe might mean disobeying everyone else. She stood in the hallway, staring up at the perfectly lit portrait of the Winlock family. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she wondered what it would cost her to stay. The warning came during a routine check-in. Dr. Hastings, Blythe's primary neurologist, arrived for the monthly assessment. He was the kind of man who spoke in absolutes, clinical, certain, unmoved by emotion. After examining Blythe, he called Calder into his study. Rosalind was summoned to listen. We need to be vigilant about false hope, Doctor, Hastings said, closing his leather portfolio. Well-meaning staff sometimes misinterpret reflexive movements as voluntary progress. It can set everyone back. Calder nodded slowly, then turned to Rosalind. His voice was calm, but the message was clear. You're here to assist, Rosalind, not to experiment. Blythe's care is guided by professionals. I need you to remember that. Yes, sir, Rosalind said quietly. But inside, something tightened. She'd heard words like that before. Years ago, in another household, she'd worked for a family with a son who couldn't sleep. The parents medicated him heavily. Rosalind had suggested he might sleep better with less noise, less pressure, less scheduled intervention. She'd been let go 3 days later. Overstepping, they called it. She'd learned then that some homes didn't want help. They wanted compliance. And silence, she was learning, could look a lot like agreement. Over the following days, Rosalind began watching more carefully. Not just Blythe's body, but her reactions. Blythe stiffened near the therapy room. She went quiet when the medical cart rolled by. She flinched when certain voices called her name, even gently. And every time someone mentioned progress, her hands curled into fists. It wasn't defiance. It was dread. One afternoon, while organizing files in Calder's office, a task she'd been assigned to help the assistant who was out sick, Rosalind came across Blythe's medical binder. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. The timeline was meticulous. Every appointment, every test, every milestone or lack thereof. But there was a gap. Between age 6 and 7, nearly 8 months were missing. No therapist notes, no doctor visits, no progress reports. Just a single entry at the end of that period. Patient presents with increased resistance to weight-bearing. Recommend revised intervention plan. No explanation, no context. Just a flat statement that something had changed. Rosalind flipped back. The entries before the gap mentioned a corrective procedure, experimental, minimally invasive, meant to encourage muscle engagement. The entries after the gap never mentioned it again. Rosalind found a gap in Blythe's medical timeline that no one would explain. She returned the binder exactly as she'd found it, but her hands were trembling. That night, as she helped Blythe prepare for bed, the girl stared out the window toward the garden. Do you ever feel like people want you to get better? Blythe asked softly. But only in the way they choose. Rosalind's throat tightened. Sometimes. What if their way doesn't work? Then maybe it's the way that's wrong. Not you. Blythe turned, her eyes wide and searching. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say more. But then her gaze flickered toward the door, and she went quiet again. Rosalind understood. Fear doesn't always come from pain. Sometimes it comes from memory. Whatever had happened during those missing months, Blythe remembered. And she'd learned that trying, really trying, came with consequences no one had written down. The next morning, Calder asked Rosalind to accompany Blythe to her session. I want you to observe the new protocol, he said. It's important you understand the standard we're maintaining. Rosalind nodded, but as she walked behind Blythe's wheelchair down the long, sterile hallway, she felt the weight of a choice she hadn't asked for. She could follow protocol. Stay silent. Keep her position. Let the system continue because it wasn't her place to question it. Or she could follow instinct. Trust what she was seeing. Risk everything to help a child who'd been taught that moving forward only led to more pain. Not everyone stays when the truth stops being convenient. Some people decide the cost is someone else's to carry. Rosalind must choose. Follow protocol or follow instinct. She stood outside the therapy room, watching through the glass as Blythe's small body tensed under the therapist's hands. And she realized something that made her chest ache. Staying silent wasn't neutral. It was a choice, too. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Blythe asked the question that changed everything. Can we go to the playground? Rosalind was folding laundry in the corner of Blythe's room. She looked up, confused. The playground? The one behind the garden. With the swings, Rosalind knew the place. She'd seen it from the upstairs windows, a small play area installed years ago. now mostly abandoned. The equipment was still maintained, but no one used it. It sat empty, like a monument to something that never happened. "Why there?" Rosalind asked carefully. Blythe's fingers traced the edge of her blanket. "I used to like it." There was something in her voice, quiet, but insistent. A memory she was trying to reach. Rosalind hesitated. The doctors had been clear. Avoid uneven terrain, minimize variables, control the environment. The playground wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't supervised. It wasn't safe, and taking Blythe there without permission would be a direct violation of everything Calder had instructed. But Rosalind asked anyway. "When did you go there?" "Before," Blythe said softly. "When I was 6. The gap. The missing months." Rosalind's pulse quickened. "What happened there?" Blythe didn't answer right away. She just stared at her hands. "I tried to stand by the swings. Someone saw me. Then we stopped going." The words landed heavy. She recalled Blythe once tried to stand there and was stopped. Rosalind sat down on the edge of the bed. "Who stopped you?" "I don't remember. But after that, everything got stricter." The pieces were forming a picture Rosalind didn't want to see. A child who'd tried, who'd been caught trying, and who'd been taught through tightened routines, through increased surveillance, through the language of protection that trying was the problem. Blythe looked up, her eyes wide and pleading. "Can we just go? Just once?" Rosalind felt the weight of the dilemma settle over her like a stone. If she obeyed, she'd protect herself, keep her job, stay safe, let someone else make the hard calls. But if she tried, if she took Blythe out there, away from the cameras and the schedules and the voices that told her she couldn't, it could go wrong in so many ways. Blythe could fall. She could panic. She could regress even further, or she could stand. Helping Blythe now risked permanent consequences. Rosalind thought about the families she'd worked for, the ones who smiled at her in the mornings and let her go without references when she asked the wrong questions. The way power worked in houses like this, silent, absolute, unforgiving. But she also thought about Blythe's voice in the dark. "It's easier when nobody's watching." Rosalind stood. "Get your sweater." Blythe blinked. "Really? We're going now. Before I change my mind." She didn't ask Calder. She didn't notify the nurse. She didn't document it in the schedule. She just wheeled Blythe through the back hallway, past the kitchen, through the side door that led to the garden path. Most people walk away before a choice like this is made. The air outside was cooler than expected. The playground sat in a small clearing, surrounded by hedges. The swings swayed gently in the breeze. The slide gleamed in the late afternoon light. Blythe stared at it like she was seeing something holy. Rosalind positioned the wheelchair near the swings and crouched down beside her. "We don't have long. I know. If this goes badly, I know," Blythe said again. But her voice was stronger now, clearer. Rosalind helped her shift forward in the chair. Blythe's feet touched the ground. She pressed down slowly, testing. Her legs trembled, but they held. She believed this was the most dangerous decision she'd ever make. She was wrong. Blythe's hands gripped the armrests. She leaned forward, pushing more weight into her legs. Her breathing quickened, but she didn't stop. For the first time in years, Blythe was trying. And then Rosalind heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her blood turned cold. Calder wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 hours. Calder arrived home earlier than expected. Rosalind's heart hammered. She looked at Blythe, who was still focused, still pressing down, still trying to hold her own weight. "We have to go," Rosalind whispered urgently. "Not yet. Now, Blythe." The girl's face crumpled, but she nodded. Rosalind helped her back into the chair and pushed her quickly toward the house, her mind racing. If Calder found out where they'd been, what they'd done, it wouldn't just be her job on the line. It would be everything. The morning light filtered through the hedges in soft, golden streaks. The playground was quiet, empty, exactly as Rosalind had planned. She'd woken early, before the staff rotations began, before the therapy schedule locked into place. She'd wheeled Blythe out through the garden path while the house was still asleep. No cameras here, no doctors, No voices measuring progress in increments too small to feel human. Just the two of them. Blythe sat at the edge of the wheelchair, staring at the metal railing that bordered the playground's small platform. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers curled tight. "You don't have to," Rosalind said quietly. "I want to." Rosalind positioned the chair close to the rail and crouched beside her. "We'll go slow." Blythe nodded. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Rosalind helped her shift forward, guiding her hands to grip the cold metal rail. Blythe's knuckles went white around it. "I've got you," Rosalind whispered. Blythe pressed her feet flat against the ground. Her legs trembled violently, muscles unused to bearing weight. But she didn't pull back. She pushed. Her body lifted just slightly off the seat of the wheelchair. Her legs shook. Her arms strained. But she was standing. Not perfectly. Not easily. But standing. Rosalind's heart pounded in her chest. She steadied Blythe with one hand on her back, the other hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. Her face was tense, focused, frightened, not celebrating. Not yet, because this wasn't a miracle. This was a risk. And then she heard the footsteps. Rosalind's blood went cold. She turned, and there he was. Calder stood at the edge of the clearing, halfway down the garden path. He'd stopped mid-step, frozen in place, his briefcase still in his hand. His eyes were locked on Blythe, on his daughter. Standing, for a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The world hung suspended in that single, impossible image. What appears to be healing is revealed as something far more dangerous. Calder's expression shifted, shock melting into something else. Awe. Relief. Hope. Blythe. His voice cracked, and that's when everything fell apart. Blythe's head snapped toward her father. Her eyes went wide, not with joy, but with panic. Her grip on the rail faltered. "No." Rosalind reached for her, but it was too late. Blythe's legs buckled. She collapsed back into the wheelchair, her breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. "Blythe!" Calder rushed forward, dropping his briefcase, but Blythe wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the ground, her whole body rigid, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Rosalind knelt in front of her. "Breathe. Just breathe." But Blythe couldn't. Her chest heaved, her eyes filled with tears. Blythe panicked afterward, not from pain, but terror. Calder reached them, his face a mixture of confusion and wonder. She was standing. I saw her standing. "She needs space," Rosalind said quickly, her voice tight. "But she—" "Mr. Winlock, please." He stopped. His gaze moved from Blythe to Rosalind, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. Suspicion. "How long has this been happening?" he asked quietly. Rosalind didn't answer. Blythe's breathing was still erratic. She wouldn't look at her father. She wouldn't look at anyone. Calder's voice softened. "Blythe, sweetheart, it's okay. This is good. This is progress." But Blythe flinched at the word. "Progress." Rosalind placed a gentle hand on Blythe's shoulder. "Let's go inside." Calder stepped back, still staring, still processing. "We need to tell the doctors. Schedule more sessions. If she can stand." "Not right now," Rosalind said firmly. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "She needs rest." For a long moment, they locked eyes. Calder was a man used to control, to answers, to systems that worked when properly managed. But right now, he was just a father who'd seen something he couldn't explain. He nodded slowly. "We'll talk. Soon." Rosalind pushed Blythe back toward the house, moving quickly, her heart hammering in her chest. Blythe hadn't said a word. Sometimes faith begins when certainty collapses. Back in Blythe's room, Rosalind helped her into bed. The girl was still shaking, her face pale, her eyes distant. "He saw," Blythe whispered. "I know. He's going to make me do it again." Rosalind knelt beside the bed. "I won't let that happen. You can't stop him." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. Rosalind thought about Calder's face in the garden, the hope in his eyes, the certainty returning. Calder believed he was witnessing progress, but Rosalind knew better. What he'd seen wasn't healing. It was fear-breaking. And the cost of that, what it would take to push Blythe further, faster, under the weight of his expectations, wasn't something she could calculate. Rosalind knew he wasn't. Downstairs, she heard Calder on the phone. His voice was animated, excited. He was calling the doctors, and Rosalind realized, with a sinking certainty, that everything was about to get much worse. Calder called Rosalind into his study that evening. The door was already open when she arrived, a formality, not an invitation. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the garden. He didn't turn when she entered. Close the door. She did. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence pressed against her chest like a weight. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't angry. It was shaken. How long? Rosalind kept her hands steady at her sides. A few weeks. And you didn't think to tell me? I wasn't sure what I was seeing. He turned then, his face drawn. My daughter stood today, Rosalind. She stood. And I had to find out by accident. I'm sorry. The apology seemed to catch him off guard. He'd expected defensiveness, justification, but Rosalind had none to give. The doctors are furious, he continued, his voice tightening. Hastings said unsupervised intervention could have caused permanent damage. That pushing her without proper assessment was reckless. Rosalind said nothing. They want you removed from her care immediately. She nodded slowly. I understand. Calder studied her, his jaw working. You don't seem surprised. I knew the risk when I took her out there. Then why did you do it? Because your daughter asked me to. Because she's been trying in secret for years. Because the people you trust have been teaching her that trying is dangerous. But Rosalind didn't say any of that. I thought it might help, she said quietly. Calder exhaled sharply and turned back to the window. The doctors are recommending a full reassessment, more intensive therapy, residential monitoring if necessary. Rosalind's stomach turned. Residential? A facility. Supervised care. They think the home environment has become too unpredictable. He meant her. Mr. Winlock. I haven't decided yet, he said quickly. But I need to know I can trust the people in this house. I need to know my daughter is safe. She is safe. Is she? He turned, his eyes sharp now. Because this morning, she collapsed in a panic. That didn't look like progress to me. Protecting Blythe now means choosing between truth and stability. Rosalind felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She could stay silent. Let him believe the doctors. Let them send Blythe somewhere sterile and controlled where she'd never try again. Or she could tell him the truth. There's something you should know, Rosalind said carefully. Calder waited. Blythe's medical file. There's a gap. 8 months when she was 6. His expression shifted. What are you talking about? No therapy notes. No progress reports. Just a line at the end saying she'd regressed. Calder's face went pale. How do you know that? I saw the binder. You went through my files. I was looking for answers. His hands curled into fists. You had no right. She stood once before. Rosalind interrupted, her voice steady. Years ago. Right before that gap. And then something happened. Something that made her stop trying. Calder stared at her, his jaw tight. That's not. Ask the doctors. Ask them what happened during those months. He didn't respond, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Doubt. He knew something. Or suspected it. For a long moment, he stood frozen. His mind working through implications he didn't want to face. Calder learns about the buried regression, but not the cause. If what you're suggesting is true, he said slowly, it would mean the people I've trusted with her care. He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Exposing the truth would implicate people he trusted. I'm not asking you to fire anyone, Rosalind said quietly. I'm asking you to look. Calder turned away, his shoulders tense. This is more complicated than you understand. I know. Dr. Hastings has been with us for years. The rehabilitation center, the specialists, they're the best in the country. I'm sure they are. If I start questioning their methods now, based on a gap in paperwork and the word of he stopped himself. A maid. He didn't say it. But they both heard it. Rosalind held his gaze. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to ask questions. Calder rubbed his face, suddenly looking older. Exhausted. Blythe hasn't spoken since this morning, he said quietly. She won't come out of her room. Won't eat. She just stares at the wall. She's afraid. Of what? Of what happens when people see her trying. The words landed heavy. Grace often arrives disguised as disruption. Calder walked to his desk and sat down heavily. He opened a drawer, pulled out Blythe's medical binder, and stared at it like it might burn him. If I look into this, he said slowly, and you're wrong, then I'll leave. No questions. And if you're right? Rosalind didn't answer, because they both knew what that would mean. Calder opened the binder. His fingers traced the dates. The gap. For a long time, he just sat there, reading. Finally, he closed it. I'm not removing you from her care, he said quietly. Not yet, Rosalind exhaled, but I need time. To think. To ask the right questions. Of course, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Don't take her out again. Not without my permission. Yes, sir. And Rosalind? She paused at the door. If you're lying to me, if any of this is manipulated, I will make sure you never work in this city again. She nodded. I understand. Calder chooses silence for now. But as Rosalind left the study, she knew the silence wouldn't last. Because upstairs, Blythe was still staring at the wall, replaying the moment her father saw her stand. And somewhere in the house, the people who'd buried the truth were starting to realize someone was digging it back up. The change came quietly. 3 days after the confrontation in Calder's study, Blythe stood by her bedroom window. Not for long, just 15 seconds. Her hand gripped the curtain for balance, her legs trembling beneath her. Rosalind was folding laundry on the other side of the room. She saw it happen but said nothing. Didn't rush over. Didn't praise. Just watched. When Blythe sat back down, her face was calm. Unreadable. Okay? Rosalind asked softly. Blythe nodded. That was all. No celebration. No announcement. Just a quiet moment that neither of them acknowledged aloud. It happened again 2 days later. Then again the day after that. Blythe would stand when the house was quiet. When no one was scheduling it. When no one was measuring it. Brief moments. Inconsistent. Unpredictable. But it was happening. And no one outside that room knew. Calder had been distant since their conversation. He'd stopped attending the therapy sessions, stopped reviewing the progress reports. He spent long hours in his study, the door closed, making calls Rosalind couldn't hear. The doctors still came, but their visits grew shorter, more tense. Dr. Hastings spoke in clipped sentences now, his confidence rattled by questions he hadn't expected. The house had shifted. The routines remained, but the certainty beneath them had cracked. Rosalind felt eyes on her everywhere she went. The head nurse watched her in the hallways. The therapist's assistant asked pointed questions about Blythe's mood. Even the housekeeper seemed cautious around her now, like Rosalind had become something unpredictable. The maid was no longer invisible, but not protected either. One evening, Calder came to Blythe's room while Rosalind was helping her prepare for bed. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. Can I come in? Blythe glanced at Rosalind, then nodded. Calder sat in the chair by the window. For a moment, he just looked at his daughter, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time in years. How are you feeling? He asked. Okay. Rosalind says you've been trying some things. Blythe's hands tightened in her lap. Sometimes. Calder nodded slowly. That's good. That's really good. But his voice didn't match the words. He sounded tired, conflicted. I've been reviewing your records, he continued, talking to some of the doctors, asking questions I should have asked years ago. Blythe didn't respond. There are things I didn't know, things I should have noticed. He rubbed his face, and for the first time, Rosalind saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. I thought I was doing everything right, he said quietly. I hired the best people, followed every recommendation. I thought if I just controlled enough variables, if I managed everything perfectly, you'd get better. Blythe's eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. I think I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Calder realizes the house itself may have caused harm. He looked at Rosalind. I spoke with Dr. Hastings about the gap in the records. He said there was a procedure. Minimally invasive. Experimental. He said it was supposed to help. What kind of procedure? Rosalind asked carefully. Nerve stimulation. They thought it would encourage muscle engagement. But it didn't work. And afterward, he trailed off, his jaw tight. Afterward, she stopped trying altogether. Rosalind's chest tightened. Did they tell you why? They said it was psychological, that she associated the procedure with pain, that the regression was unfortunate, but not their fault. Do you believe them? Calder didn't answer right away. He looked at Blythe, who was staring at the floor, her whole body tense. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said finally. Silence settled over the room. What happens now? Rosalind asked. I don't know that either. No one agrees on what to do next. Calder stood slowly. He walked to Blythe's bedside and crouched down so he was at her eye level. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking, for not asking, for not listening, for thinking I could fix you like you were a problem that needed solving. Blythe's tears spilled over. She reached for his hand, and he held it like it was the most fragile thing in the world. You're not broken, he whispered. You never were. Rosalind turned away, giving them space. She moved to the window and stared out at the garden, her own eyes burning. This wasn't chance. This wasn't skill. This felt like mercy. After a while, Calder stood and left quietly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of truths he could no longer ignore. Rosalind stayed until Blythe fell asleep. Then she walked downstairs and found Calder standing in the hallway, staring at the portraits on the wall, images of a perfect family in a perfect home. I don't know how to undo this, he said without turning. You can't undo it, Rosalind replied gently, but you can stop making it worse. He nodded slowly. The doctors want another assessment. They want to move forward with a more aggressive treatment plan. And what do you want? He looked at her then, his face lined with exhaustion. I want my daughter to feel safe in her own home. Rosalind held his gaze. Then maybe it's time to let her lead. Calder didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. The house was still, the routines still in place, but the foundation had shifted, and for the first time, no one was certain what would happen next. The house sounded different now, not louder, not quieter, just different. The rigid schedules had softened. Therapy sessions were shorter, spaced further apart. The equipment that once lined every hallway had been moved to a single room available, but not omnipresent. The therapists who remained spoke differently too, less clinical, more patient. They asked Blythe what she wanted to try instead of telling her what she needed to do. Progress was no longer measured in charts and milestones. It was measured in breaths, in moments, in the small choices Blythe made when no one was forcing her hand. She didn't walk, not the way Calder had once dreamed, not the way the doctors had promised, but she wasn't frozen anymore. Some mornings, she stood by her window and watched the birds. Other days, she took 3 steps from her bed to her desk, gripping furniture for balance, her legs shaking but holding. And some days, she didn't try at all, and that was okay too. Rosalind stayed close, but differently now. She no longer hovered. She no longer intervened, unless Blythe asked. She'd learned to give space where once she'd given help, but her role in the house had changed. The other staff were polite, but distant. The head nurse still watched her carefully. The housekeeper no longer made small talk in the kitchen. Rosalind remained, but her role was fragile. Calder had kept her on, but the decision hadn't been easy. She'd seen the strain in his face during their last conversation, the way he weighed her presence against the doctor's warnings, against the whispers from staff who believed she'd overstepped. I'm keeping you because Blythe trusts you, he'd said quietly. But trust here is complicated now. She'd nodded. She understood. Trust, once broken, didn't return all at once. Sometimes it didn't return at all. One afternoon, Calder stood in Blythe's doorway watching his daughter sketch at her desk. She was sitting upright without support, her feet flat on the floor, her body relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. He didn't announce himself, just watched. After a moment, Rosalind approached from the hallway. She stopped beside him, following his gaze. "She looks peaceful," he said softly. "She is." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I keep thinking about all the years I pushed, all the specialists, all the interventions. You were trying to help, was I?" He turned to her, his face lined with something that looked like grief. "Or was I trying to fix something that made me uncomfortable?" Rosalind didn't have an answer for that. Calder lives with the knowledge that control caused harm. "I wanted her to be normal," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself it was for her, that I was giving her every chance. But maybe I just couldn't accept that she was enough as she was." Inside the room, Blythe looked up from her sketch and smiled a small, genuine smile before returning to her work. "She's enough now," Rosalind said gently. Calder nodded, but his eyes were wet. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. She doesn't need to forgive you. She needs you to see her." He looked at his daughter again, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open. "I see her," he whispered. "I see her now. Some trust is restored. Some damage is permanent." Later that evening, as Rosalind helped Blythe prepare for bed, the girl spoke quietly. "My dad asked if I was happy." "What did you say?" "I said sometimes." She paused. "Is that okay?" Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed. "That's honest. And honest is always okay." Blythe nodded slowly. "He cries sometimes, when he thinks I don't notice. He's learning, just like you are." "Do you think things will go back to how they were?" Rosalind considered the question carefully. "No, I don't think they will." Blythe looked worried. "Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart. I think it means you're all finally moving forward." Blythe smiled small, but real. As Rosalind turned off the light and moved toward the door, Blythe's voice came soft from the darkness. "Rosalind?" "Yes, thank you for staying." Rosalind's throat tightened. "Thank you for letting me." She closed the door gently and stood in the hallway, her hand still on the handle. The house was quiet now. Not the controlled silence of schedules and fear, just the ordinary quiet of a home at rest. Downstairs, she could hear Calder moving through the kitchen, making tea, probably. Something he'd started doing lately. Small rituals that didn't need to be perfect. Some stories don't ask for applause. They ask who was willing to stay. Rosalind walked to her room and sat by the window. Outside, the playground stood empty in the moonlight. The swings swayed gently in the night breeze. She thought about the morning Calder had seen Blythe standing. The panic, the fear, the way everything had unraveled and rebuilt itself into something fragile and uncertain. She thought about the cost, the tension that still hummed beneath the surface, the trust that remained conditional, the knowledge that one wrong move could end everything. But she also thought about Blythe's smile, the way her shoulders had dropped, the way she'd started asking questions instead of just answering them. Not every miracle makes noise. Some only return what fear once took. The house wasn't healed. The damage wasn't erased. But something had shifted. Something small and precious had been returned. And in the quiet of that moment, Rosalind understood that this fragile, imperfect progress was enough. Not because it was complete, but because it was real. She closed her eyes and let the silence settle around her. The house breathed differently now, and so did everyone in it.